Okay, so we had this long conversation about global civil society and what it is and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, this is not the class where you need to know everything about global civil society. That's more of a political theory class or some sort of institutions class. We got a really strict purpose in mind here. We're trying to solve collective action problems. We want some global governance here. We got some problems in the world that we want to fix. So we have a really solid question, and that question is, what help does global civil society give us in terms of trying to solve these collective action problems? So that's what we've got one slide here. What effect, if any, does global civil society have on solving collective action problems? If your task, which it will be for your project, is to come up with a solution to a collective action problem, what kind of leverage can global civil society possibly give you that you might begin there? So, global civil society can assist in norm formation. In other words, this is how we should be talking about this. This is the norm that should be out there. And NGOs, media, groups like that can help in norm formation. It can impose costs. Now the question then becomes, like, what costs and how? And I'll give you a good example of this is a social movement like, say, Black Lives Matter. That if something needs to change, for example, and let's say policing in America, and there's a whole group of people that think, man, policing in America needs to change. You can't fine the government because of what they're doing. What Black Lives Matter, for example, the protests and all that can do is it can impose costs. And there are ways to impose costs. It doesn't have to be protests, but there are other things like withholding authority and things like that. So there are ways to impose costs. It's just not exactly costs like taxes and things like that. Global civil society can act as political entrepreneurs. NGOs, remember that term, political entrepreneur? I'll let you look it up if you haven't. Take a second and look it up if you don't remember what it is. It's on the day we talked about collective action problems. NGOs in particular are made up of true believers. People who work at, for example, the World Wildlife Fund are not people who could take or leave animals. They're people that love animals. This is a group of true believers. NGOs tend to be packs of true believers. They're willing to do extra work to ensure that the public good that they care about is being provided. So, oftentimes they can do a lot of the work, so all I have to do is come along and just click like, or support this with a $10 donation, or at least not oppose this thing, where someone who doesn't care as much about it can contribute at a lower scale and still feel like they're contributing, like there's a willingness to do that. They can make some solutions more difficult. So I'll just give you an example. If groups in global civil society have to be parties to solutions, this increases the difficulty of building solutions. Sometimes we'll talk about like a treaty where 2 or more states have to abide by this particular thing. But sometimes there's some global civil society solutions that require the participation, or at least not the active opposition, of global civil society. And they haven't signed the treaty at all, right? So there can be some problems there. Let me give you an example that's not going to be global, but let's go back to the roommate situation. So let's say the roommates have worked out this great system for cleaning up the house. And let's say one of the roommates has a boyfriend or girlfriend come over, and they are just a mess, and they just leave a mess everywhere. Well, okay, the system, whatever system we have set up, has to be such that, if something other than the parties to the agreement comes along and makes things more difficult, then there has to be some way to solve this problem. Even if it's going to be, the person whose boyfriend or girlfriend came over has to be the one to clean up the mess. That still has to be part of the solution. It does make things a little bit harder. It does make things more complicated. Denationalization may undermine states, which could destabilize other collective action problems. So the more, and again, we're going to talk more about this later, but the more that we rely on non-state solutions to collective action problems, does that undermine state authority? And if it undermines state authority, are you solving this collective action problem and undermining this solution to a collective action problem that depends on states? it's getting way more messy, but I do want to make sure that we sort of point that out. It can make some solutions easier by essentially working around states. Like, for example, the thing that we saw on plastics, that video, from that lady, that NGO that she worked for, she's trying to work around the United States. The United States doesn't want to sign on. We got to work around this thing so the United States has no choice but to basically participate. So anything we can do to sort of help create that can help solve our problem. It also doesn't fix the perceived imbalance between the West and the rest. In other words, if we're looking for global civil society to enhance the legitimacy of our solutions, fantastic. But we have to take into account that not everybody sees global civil society as equally legitimate. For example, someone who thinks that the West dominates may not be as thrilled with global civil society coming along and saying, yes, this is what we want. I don't know that I have a great example right now. I don't want to make things more confusing. I just want to quit at this point. But these are just some things to think about, especially as we go into next week and start talking about the different actors, many of which are part of global civil society, and how they can contribute or have to be taken into account in a solution of a global or a collective action problem. Blah. Okay, I hope that made enough sense that we're ready to go to next week. And if not, then I guess watch it again. Maybe I said something better than you think. I don't know. But I will see you guys. Have a good weekend. I'll see you guys on Monday.